Hello, welcome, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone joining us on this identity as a security perimeter. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for taking the times out of your busy schedules on this Thursday afternoon and joining this webinar. I do know that it's not easy getting someone to join or commit themselves to anything on a Thursday afternoon. So your presence here is really enjoyed and appreciated. Firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Bukama Sosiopela, and I'm here together with the NetCB team. And joining myself from the NetCB team is Mr. Clovis Burgers, who's our managing director, as well as Mr. Justin Foxcroft, who's our sales director, as well as Mr. Hendrik de Bruin, who's a security specialist. And all the way from the Okta team, we have Mr. Christian Robbins and Ryan Verma, as well as Kieran Mendoza from the Okta team. From our side as NetCB, we'll be having Hendrik, who's be doing some of the introductions from our side. And then he'll hand over to Mr. Christian Robbins, who will be doing the introduction from the Okta side of things. Well, yeah, as I said before, thank you guys very much for joining us. And do not forget to post any questions that you have within the Q&A box, not within the chat box. And I promise you will answer any question that you do have for us, even though you asked us how much a carton of milk costs. I promise you will answer each and every single one of your questions. All right, then, take it away, Hendrik.
Hi, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Just a few words from NetCB. We have been involved with the identity-driven solutions and security solutions from the get-go, really, more than 15 years ago, where the concept was still back then, identity management and the provisioning and deprovisioning of identities. We used to term it zero-day start back then. During the 15 years, we have been implementing these solutions across Africa as well as the Middle East. Some of these organizations include central banks, large petrochemical organizations, etc. The Zero Trust framework is relevant not only from a normal day-to-day security and governance perspective, but also from a modern-day remote workforce perspective. Which has been perpetuated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Lastly, there's additional value in Okta specifically due to the rapid integration and deployment of the solutions, not only securing your endpoints, but also enhancing your end user experience in general. So that's it from myself, and I hand over to Christian. Thank you very much.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, as was introduced, I'm Chris Robbins. I'm a sales engineer with Okta. I'm responsible for the African and Israeli markets, and today just be taking you through a brief presentation on identity as a security perimeter and really how that fits in with a zero trust framework. So we look at today's current feelings on zero trust and sort of where it stands in the marketplace. We certainly hear from all of our customers and prospects over and over again that zero trust has pretty much achieved a buzzword status, and it's right up there with sort of digital transformation. And that's really because it has a bit of a brand associated with a sort of modern security model. And so vendors, and many vendors out there, are sort of riding on the coattails of this term and creating real market confusion. But moreover, the term zero trust is pretty problematic in itself. In a world of sort of data breaches and data abuses and misinformation, many organizations are sort of doubling down on the core values of trust. And so pitching zero trust model is a bit of a challenge. But going out and sort of talking to our customers, let's see where it goes beyond the buzzword and see what they're sort of saying in the market today. But having done a survey, we found that only 16% of organizations or customers within Okta are on an explicit zero trust journey. But 97% of those respondents say that they're engaged in zero trust projects. So there's clearly something to this, though many security leaders have told us that it's not necessarily the name, but the intent of a zero trust strategy that compels them to take on these projects. So if we look at the origins of zero trust, and the old way always assumed a trusted network protected by the network perimeter, and an untrusted network was always outside the perimeter where the sort of the bad actors lived or reside. So this security model has always been problematic, right? Because when that perimeter has been breached or does get breached, an attacker has relatively easy access to all of the company's privileged internal network. So this makes it very easy for them to then breach trusted applications and infrastructure, and largely go completely undetected unless they are performing something malicious. So if we remove the network perimeter and everything then becomes untrusted, and we start to view everything as if it was on the internet, bad actors, infrastructure such as email servers and CRM systems, company employees and third-party contractors, on network or not, we tend to view them all as now being untrusted. So in 2009, the Zero Trust framework was born. I think it was came out of the guys at Forrester who first coined the frame. But their approach to begin with was pretty simplistic, and it was all around micro-segmentation. And micro-segmentation, it's a technique of network security that helps security architects to divide the data center in different security segments, down to individual level of workloads, and then they can define security controls with a reference to each of those workloads. So micro segmentation architecture, it helps networks by creating DMZs for security purposes within single data centers and then across multiple data centers. Within this fine-grained security policies, they're tied to individual workloads, and it limits the attacker's ability to move from data center, even if it infiltrates the perimeter defenses of that particular data center or network. But we sort of evolved from that approach now, and we're more around sort of a software-defined perimeter. So the user doesn't need to figure out a method of access to any particular resource. We have systems now that can figure that out for them. So Zero Trust, isn't really just a concept. It really is today's reality. If we look at this slide and sort of how that's segmented across that. So really what it is showing is that more people, employees, privileged users, contractors, etc., they all need to access a variety of things, from applications to infrastructure to APIs, and they're doing this from more locations and from more devices than ever before. And with the uptake to sort of SaaS and cloud-based applications, and infrastructure more and more are now being located outside of that traditional perimeter. And while organizations had been thinking about this approach previously, it's now become a quick reality for most organizations, right? So Zero Trust is how we can start to solve this problem. And given sort of recent increase in home and remote working due to the COVID viruses and everything else that have been going on, this is a lot more urgent in terms of trying to fix or solve the issues around this than it was, say, a good 6 to 12 months ago. So when we think of device trust, we really think of Google's Beyond Corp papers that they released back in 2015, when it really took a hold, or people started to look at it and go into it more in more detail. And if you think this was sort of the marquee example of zero trust done right, and a massive scale. And this really came about after an APT attack that Google had, which was known as Operation Aurora, which happened in 2009. And after that had happened and Google had suffered the big breach, it really made them completely rethink their entire corporate security model. So what came out of that is it really made them assume that the internal network was as dangerous as the internet, and their mission was to really build or put together something in terms of a mission statement that was to have every Google employee work successfully from untrusted networks as they would from trusted networks, and also without the use of a VPN. So the core principles that came out of the Beyond Corp papers were really connecting from a particular network must not determine which services you can access. A second one that came out of it was access to services is granted based on what we know about you and your device. And then thirdly, the principle that came out was all access to services must be authenticated, authorized, and also encrypted. So based off those core 3 principles, Google then implemented the Beyond Corp and then sort of released it out there really as some marquee papers for people to look into and start implementing across other things. So what really is the business goal behind what they're trying to achieve with that and how they go about doing it? Now, the key to Zero Trust and what we have done with Okta is the ability to really enable practical security that's people-centric. Instead of network-centric, it starts with identity. It's all about identity, and that's what it's all about and what we're introducing and doing around Zero Trust with Okta. So what comes out of that is we just want to make sure we're giving the right people the right access to the right resources in the right context at the right time, and most importantly, with as little friction as possible. So it's no longer about me, getting up in the morning and going to my company's office and accessing resources from a secured network. Today, much like many of you on this call probably, sat at home doing the same thing, it's all about me accessing those same resources from home, be that from my mobile device, my corporate issued laptop, maybe my home PC, and potentially that's going to be at any time from any location. So what we're seeing, again, as a leader in Zero Trust, and this was from the guys from Forrester last year, and some of the things they came out and put Okta in there. Now, really what Forrester are saying, if you go ahead and read their Zero Trust paper, is the way they're sort of going out and telling customers to attack a Zero Trust strategy or start with a Zero Trust strategy is very much to start with identity and device security. So what they're saying is they consistently find that organizations and enterprises have the earliest and rapidest success if they focused on improving identity management and device security. So they're saying that's always a good place to start or a good foothold if going and looking to implement Zero Trust. And there are 2 core components of the Zero Trust ecosystem that drive that sort of risk reduction and build confidence with executives that the organization can realize security benefits from its Zero Trust program, and more importantly, realize those benefits very quickly. So if we look at a Zero Trust reference architecture, which tends to be one of our most favored slides here at Okta, we'll really have a look and see sort of where Okta fits within that. So when we talk about Zero Trust and how we plug these things together, at Okta, obviously we always start with identity. The user and device are the fundamental parting point for delivering that secured access. So when we have the user and the device, we can then start looking at and bringing in context. So where this context comes from and what we mean by that is, I know it's Chris who is signing in, but what do I know about the different context around him coming in and using that identity to try and access potential resources or particular resources? So context basically helps us in understanding risk. So what else do I know about Chris? What else do I know about what he's using or where he's coming in? I know Chris is in the sales engineering team. So he's part of sales engineering. So I know automatically from that, he's going to have access to certain resources. But what do I know about his device? Is it a personal device? Is it a trusted device, untrusted device? Is it a mobile device? Again, we can start pulling all of these contextual information from the user's identity and device as part of that authentication. We then want to look at, maybe what his location is, his region. Do I want to make sure he can only connect or build policy around a particular region, country or city that he's coming from? Maybe he's trying to connect from a location he's not been in before, a new location. Some of the other stuff we can wrap around that geolocation and geofencing type stuff is things around velocity. We can pick up that, Chris has logged in London. He's been there all morning. But maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes after that initial authentication, he's tried logging in Johannesburg. We can view that and take that as contextual components as part of that user's authentication to the service. Now, some of the other things we can do around that is also around what they do around the networking. So, you know, we can see if he's signing in from the corporate network, whether he's coming from a home network. We can even drop down to contextual context to see if he's maybe, you know, trying to log in from a Tor browser. You know, if he's coming from a Tor browser, we may want to completely block that activity, as we certainly recommend to a lot of our customers out there. But then following that, we can then view other context as to, you know, what application he's trying to access. It may be that he's just trying to access email. It may be that he's trying to access, you know, an application with more sensitive data. But what we can do with all of that context is build it all together and create and start building some risk signals that we can then use to start evaluating that within Okta. But not only do we do all of that context and everything within Okta, we do go out and integrate or pull in context from product from outside of Okta that may be still within your same security stack. So we can start wrapping in and taking in sort of as many factors as we can from that contextual side of things. So a good example of that, if we look at one there, if we take Proofpoint as an example, so not only do I know who Chris is and what groups he's a member of, but Proofpoint also has the ability to see who are the most targeted users within that organization. And if I know that Chris is constantly being targeted, for example, by phishing attacks, then I probably want to do something about that, right? I want to maybe apply a different policy, a more stringent policy or anything about that. You know, I don't want the user to be vulnerable to that attack. So I might define a policy that requests that Chris uses a YubiKey as an example every time he signs in. Some harder factor or stronger form of factor to authenticate, as I know he's you know, being targeted by those phishing attacks, using something like a YubiKey as part of his authentication flow, can, you know, mitigate those attacks or try and prevent those attacks from coming in. We have the ability to take all of that context and build those and start applying those and creating those signals and applying them to risk. And then from that, we can go on. And once we've understood that risk and given that risk sort of a score based on the context we're pulling in from that particular user or device, I can not only combine it into a risk score, but using Okta's flexible security or policy engine, if anything is amiss, I can then start breaking that out and applying a different policies, such as an additional factor, or I can go through and perhaps block the entire authentication in its entirety. You know, if I see Chris coming from an unknown device in China, and I've got a Proofpoint trigger that says he's one of the most vulnerable or highest attacked in the organization, I could just completely block that authentication at that stage and prevent Chris from authenticating and accessing any resources. Or I could drop down and apply a policy that states he could maybe come in and use sort of lower risk applications, something like his email. But I can automatically on the fly then prevent that user from accessing something like the CRM system or maybe his HR application. And then of course we want to sort of combine all of that for when they go through and access any of those resources. Now with Okta, we support all of the resources that we can come through using any of the standards sort of out there. We're very much a standards-based product, whether that's sort of a radius authentication, whether we're picking that from sort of LDAP, or whether we're going through and doing sort of single sign-on using Federation with SAML or WS Federation, all the way through to accessing things like API services over OAuth or OpenID Connect, and then also infrastructure using SSH and RDP. Again, I can take all of this context, apply it to that user and the device they're coming from to make those sort of informed policy decisions as to what, how, and where they are accessing any of those resources from. And then finally, we obviously want to combine all of that with our analytics or orchestration tools. So if anything is amiss during the authentication process, such as Chris was coming from a brand new device we've not seen before, from a country that we've defined as high risk, it will be picked up and analyzed by a product like Splunk and we can then pass that seamlessly over to the security team for further investigation. Then if we just look at one of our customers out there, I'm sure you're all familiar with 21st Century Fox. Going to a zero trust model with these guys was something of a must, given the nature of the business they work in. 21st Century Fox have around 30,000 full-time employees. They also had out there around 50,000 sort of extended partners or contractors, other studios. So when these guys are putting a film together or starting on a film, funny enough, they spin up a lot of infrastructure, particular for that film or that particular program they're working on. And then they have lots of different IP within that. So how do they make sure that the right employees and contractors have the right access to the right information? For them, it's critical. They don't want films leaking, people having access to the wrong information. So what they sort of came down to and understood was that identity was the core to this. So after integrating with Okta, they were able to consider each user access request based on the context of the user, the application, the device, the location, and the network they were coming from. So the company was able to easily onboard, offboard employees and contractors, which really ensured there was no security gaps. And then most importantly for those users, both employees and extended partners, the experience was so seamless that it's practically automatic for them. So once we come through that and we look at the identity and access maturity curve, people have now bought into device trust. They now understand that identity should be a foundation. We can really now start to look at what we can do with an identity tool, as it's not just something we can turn off and turn on like a light switch. Really from a customer's perspective, it's how can I put this into practice within my business. So this maturity curve lays out view and sequence of events that we really see our customers take when they're going on to sort of zero trust projects. And we've really seen these 4 key stages, what our customers go through from experience with them and helping them and everything else in terms of how they really deploy that zero trust framework. So most of our customers and prospects, they really begin with stage 0, where we see really sort of a fragmented identity. So they tend to start with on-premise, maybe they have an LDAP server or an Active Directory with plenty of on-premise applications. And more than likely, none of those things are currently connected properly, and individual applications will still have all of their own unique usernames and passwords. So this makes it very hard to manage from an admin perspective, creating those user accounts, remembering to remove them. But then most importantly with that, it's pretty mundane for the end users themselves, for the user experience. There's lots of usernames and passwords they need to remember to be able to access each of those individual applications that tend to be on premise. Then moving on from that, we then see sort of stage 1. And this is where our customers are starting to integrate all of those applications. So they start by looking at sort of SSO. So they can have real visibility into all of the users and applications that they're using. And then they move through and start sort of layering on MFA on top of all that. And then they're looking at unified policies across not just on-premise applications, but also as they start their cloud journey into cloud applications and also to their servers too. And most organizations we talk to are falling, somewhere between stage 0 and stage 1 at the moment, or they're at stage 1 and they're moving down through, some of these projects here that we see as part of that rollout. But once they have all of that under control and have good visibility, that's when they start looking at layering things on and adding sort of contextual access. And this is the one that's really important in today's climate and in today's remote environment. As traditionally, a lot of access was based on sort of network, and this is something we can't control anymore. With more and more people working from home and working remotely, no longer can we just base a policy on what network a user is coming from. We need a lot more contextual policies that comes along with that. So today, like I said, I'm not on the corporate network. So what else can I evaluate to make sure it really is Chris when he's coming to sign in? So the pieces of context I mentioned before, about device, about geography, and all of those other things that come with it, we can then set policy based on that context and then require the user to provide, additional factors if required. If it's, coming from a non-trusted device, I might require a YubiKey. If it's coming from a corporate device in a location that I'm aware of, a device I've seen previously, I may just take a passwordless policy. But it really allows us to set different factors across different user groups in different scenarios. And it's also where we want to start looking at everything after they leave to look at automated sort of provisioning and deprovisioning capabilities of users, or sort of life cycle management. And what customers now seem to realize that the provisioning and automated deprovisioning, it's not really much of an efficiency tool these days. If you have someone who leaves, you don't want them to still have access to everything. You want to make sure that when they leave, they immediately have revoked access to all of the tools which you'd given them access to, which is really important. And it's also there to eliminate orphan and dormant accounts that you may have within those applications. And then from that, we continue to extend those access controls across all areas of the stack through to things like secure APIs as well. And then the holy grail of this process is really getting to sort of a true adaptive workforce. We're extending those access policies into a more holistic picture of risk. So rather than having a set of discrete policies across all of those possibilities, we're using a sort of a machine learning risk engine to evaluate and let you know if something was detected to be amiss. And that way you're just setting policies based on risk rather than discrete policies on individual contexts like we've been doing in the stage 2 with contextual access policies. And this is where we start to get into things like continuous authentication, which really refers to what happens after a user has logged into the service. So if you hear the term continuous authentication, really what it means is, Chris is logged in, he's doing his work, but he's suddenly changed network. Okta can detect this and apply a different security policy, if required. Or, what happens if during the time, Chris has been authenticated, his device becomes infected with malware, or malware gets loaded onto his computer, after he's signed in. It's, can Okta do something about that? So at the moment, it's not something that we can do in the product as today, but as a future and what we're building in something in terms of investment and into the product later in this year is, something we really can do around that. So we're going to see a lot more. And where we move to, especially as our customers are going across this journey, is really sort of a lot of integration into what we can do around that continuous adaptive authentication, and really picking things up after the user has logged in. So not only are we using authentication service just as sort of the front door or the bouncer on the door, once you're in, you can then do what you need to do in the club. We're really going to start enabling our customers to, carry on making those policy decisions after users have logged in, and what they're doing after that, and what's happening in a contextual way after that takes place. And lastly, there's frictionless access, which we tend to refer in Okta now as sort of passwordless. So when you have a complete picture of risk, that's really when you want to make things a lot easier, or give your end users an easier experience. And what we mean by passwordless is, if we take in all these different contextual approaches, so we know all of the access policies, the MFA, all of the context we mentioned in the reference architecture, why not just allow a user to use a username in an MFA? Why prompt them for a password if we're pretty assured that it is that user based off the context of what they're coming from and what they're providing? So as a summary, we sort of see most customers somewhere between stage 0 and stage 1, but ideally, stage 2 is really important for our customers today, as they can bring in things like device and geography instead of leaning on and building policy based on sort of the traditional network, which is what organizations had done with when all of their workforce was sort of office-based, right? Now we've got more of a sporadic home working environment. Adding those contextual access policies is becoming more and more important. MFA is a start, but really, does it take in full control and give you sort of that entire peace of mind that that person is who they say they are when they're accessing or trying to access through to resources? So especially, given what we're seeing out in the market today, our customers are really asking for us to make sure their workforce is secure as it can be. And really where we're getting to with that is getting our customers as close as we can to stage 2 and hopefully above. So which Okta products do you need to achieve sort of zero trust? And the short answer to that is, pretty much all of them. So from the maturity curve we just talked about and gone through, we can see we have sort of, single sign-on. We've also talked about adaptive MFA and lifecycle management, but we also use advanced server access, which allows our customers to securely access server infrastructure directly. We also have API access management and Okta Access Gateway, which really extend that core risk engine and core analysis across not just cloud applications, but all of your applications, including on-premise and any of your other resources. So if we just talk now around another sort of customer we have out there, or a good use case, which was USA Today. It was a customer who had around 13,000 employees. And they were responsible for around 110 or just over 110 local newspaper brands across the US. They also had around 350 plus applications that all of the users within their organization were needing to access. So they built a security strategy with zero trust really at its core, and instead of relying solely on traditional perimeter-based security solutions, they went through and deployed Okta single sign-on, Okta universal directory, the adaptive multi-factor authentication, and our lifecycle management for provisioning and deprovisioning users to those applications. So they then came out with a requirement for 100% MFA across all of their workforce. So using the Okta adaptive MFA really helped them to achieve this and establish a more secure environment. So they were able to deploy policies that automatically dictated sort of which users had access to which applications, and the company's policies could be used to reduce the attack surface by focusing on users and their devices at a much more granular level. So some of the benefits they were able to see from using Okta and enabling a zero trust framework were really sort of increased protection, a very streamlined user experience, a very streamlined user process, and also increased productivity for reporters and editors because it made their life a lot easier using single sign-on, having all their applications and access in one place, just using a single set of credentials. So what we'll do is just take you through a brief demonstration of what that looks like from an end user perspective. If you bear with us while I just change my screen. So what we have in Okta is just a very easy end user portal. A user can go to a particular URL that you have issued to them, and they would go from there and authenticate just using their Active Directory credentials, LDAP credentials, or anything else along it. And once authenticated, they will go through the Okta policy engine or contextual policy engine. So this is where we would apply or pick up any of those context on geography, network, what type of device, whether they required an MFA, and that's where we can put them through the risk engine and then decide a factor based on that. So just with this user, based on my Okta demo portal, I just have a very basic policy that says if I'm not on the corporate network, I need to provide a multi-factor authentication. So what that basically means is if I'm not in a secured environment or a corporate environment, it's just a very easy way to blanket MFA across any external applications or internal applications being accessed externally in just a complete standard way. So in this instance, I just have a MFA for Okta Verify enrolled for this particular user, which would send a push notification to my mobile device, or I can use something like a biometric security key. So I could integrate with something on like a Touch ID within my MacBook Pro, and then verify that user where they can then go through and access any of their corporate applications. So if I was to give you a demo as an example very quickly of me accessing my corporate network with Okta. Oh, actually, you have to bear with me if I just change my browser. And authenticate. I can use the biometric key within my laptop, and it's going to log me into a nice simple portal and then present me with all of the applications that I've been granted access to. So from there, as an end user, I can then just click into any of those applications, and it's just going to launch me and give me a nice, easy, simple federated access. So from that end user perspective, it's all very nice and simple. No single URL to remember. They verify themselves, and then they have instant access to all of the company resources. From a security perspective, taking in the Zero Trust framework and what we've done around that identity, that's where we can start applying in all of those different risk factors and everything else with that. So that's all we're going to do as part of the demo. I don't know if there's been any questions submitted, Justin.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions there. We just pull them up for you. Yeah. The first question was, I have a number of contractors that come and go. How does Okta's licensing model support that?
So yeah, good question. So what we can do within Okta is we can link Okta to your existing user repository. So in the majority of instances, that's Active Directory, which generally looks after the workforce. When it comes to contractors, we have a couple of options. You can either maintain them or keep them within Active Directory itself, or we can put them into Okta directly. So we can save some costs there on adding additional CAL licensing. Now, contractors being an active user in Okta, they do take up an Okta license, but based on not having to have a CAL license, we can do it that way. And then we can also do contractors in Okta on a time-limited basis. So you can put a contractor in who can be active for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And then we can automatically, as part of the Okta workflows process, sort of disable or remove those users when their contract expires or extend their contract.
Oh, all right. Thanks for that one. Next one is, do you offer user provisioning with entitlement?
We do, yes, depending on which application. So with our user provisioning in Okta, we integrate with applications who have the APIs exposed for us to integrate with. So we have over 3,000 pre-built out-the-box provisioning capabilities. And if those applications support those entitlements as well, we can do that as part of the provisioning process. If we take something like Salesforce as an example here, we can also assign automatically based on group membership what roles, licenses, and everything else that user requires as part of that provisioning process.
Oh, all right, fantastic. The next question is, can Okta MFA integrate with AD Connect?
We not quite with AD Connect. AD Connect tends to be a sort of a standalone tool for provisioning users to the Azure AD or Office 365 backend. But we do with ADFS, or the Active Directory Federated Services. So we have a plugin where we can integrate Okta MFA there, if that's something that customers are looking at. So there's various different points we can integrate the Okta MFA. We have plugins for things like RDP for Windows. We can integrate at Radius, or we can integrate with specific products like Microsoft ADFS.
Oh, all right then. I think this one is a bit interesting. It says, can I connect more than one identity source to Okta SSO?
We can, and it's one of the plus points, and where we've had a lot of success with Okta. We don't care what the identity source is, or how many identity sources you have. We can sort of integrate all of those sources directly into Okta. As an example, we do have customers out there who have over 100, believe it or not, entirely independent, separate Active Directories. We can integrate all of those Active Directories using a very lightweight, secure AD agent. It's very quick, simple, and easy to do. And then we just multiplex those user accounts within Okta into sort of policy and access decisions to give those users access to those applications. So it's a very simple, straightforward process. We can also mix that up as well. So you might have Active Directory, you might have LDAP, you might want to take a feed from your HR system. Again, with Okta, and what we do with the product Okta is we can take a feed from those individual sources, or a mixture of all those sources.
Oh, all right then. Thanks a lot for that, Christian. I think that's all of the questions so far. I'm not sure if any one of the panelists have anything to add on to that.
Chris, it's Kobus here. Can you maybe quickly share, just stop sharing your screen, so I just want to quickly share my screen on this side. Let me just do that quickly. I just want to show everyone that's on this webinar. At NetCB, we're already using Okta now for quite a while. And because I know a lot of the clients that are on the webinar at the moment are using more or less the same applications than what we are using. So I'm quickly going to log on to my system. I'm going to do the traditional password way of logging in, and I just want to show you something as well. If I can remember my password. And you can see immediately on our side, it will also do that push notification. Mine is actually set up to automatically send my push authentication. And I just on my mobile device verified it is really me that logged onto the system. And you can see immediately it logged me in onto all my most frequently used applications. This is our dashboard when we log in. We're even using Office 365, so I can even authenticate myself straight into that side. You can see my group-wise web access is already logged in automatically on this side. My Vibe site is already logged in or busy logging in. We're using Zendesk as a help desk system. You can see I already got onto my Zendesk. Our CRM system, I've already logged in. Our remote management support management system, it's already authenticated me. Now, for those of you that are wondering which, we're using both Active Directory and eDirectory, but I actually use our eDirectory credentials because those credentials are in any case synchronized with the Active Directory credentials. I thought that would have been of interest to everyone.
Oh yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that, Quirvis. I'm quite sure it was of much help. Is there anything anyone else would like to add? All right then. Okay, seems like we had a pretty good time. I enjoyed myself. I'm not sure about everyone else, but yeah, seems like no one popped in that question about how much a carton of milk costs. So I guess we'll leave that in for next time then. So yeah, thank you guys very much for joining us yet again. And please do go to www.netcb.com to find out more about the events that we'll be hosting on a monthly or weekly basis, rather, until the end of this year. And more events will be coming up next year as well, so you don't have to get disappointed about that one. All right, then. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
I just want to also add to that, this whole webinar will be available on our website within 24 hours, as well as on our YouTube channel. And you are welcome to share it with any of your colleagues.
That is correct, yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Chris, and everyone. Just for easy navigation, when you go to our website, www.netcb.com, if you click on the events list at the top, it will give you a list of all the past events as well as the events scheduled for the remainder of the year. And if you then skip over to blogs, under that section, excuse me, it includes the recordings of all of our past webinars as well.